From Chris Cyborg hating him for bullying her, to Al La Quinta saying he's endangered fighters by doing weigh-ins in the afternoon. This is the real reason so many fighters hate Dana White. Let's start off with Chris Cyborg. For someone who's one of the most iconic names in women's combat sports, you'd think that she gets the level of respect she deserves. Now, this might be true for the rest of the boxing world, but not for Dana White. As some of you might know, she became the featherweight champion and was on top of the world, until she lost to Amanda Nunes at UFC 232. In the events after the fight, Dana came out and said how he'd ask her for a rematch, and that she said no since she feared losing again. But get this, that's not what really happened. Chris came forward and called out the UFC president for lying about her, and explained that she never shied away from a rematch with Amanda. But the feud doesn't end there. After Dana kept publicly humiliating her like this, she posted a video exposing the UFC president. In the video, we could see Dana speaking about the fighter in a way that wasn't only offensive, but also very unprofessional. He said, and I quote, "She looked like Wanderlei Silva in a dress and heels." But if that wasn't bad enough, he went ahead and mimicked her in front of a room full of reporters.
I said, when I saw her at the MMA Awards, she looked like Wanderlei Silva in a dress and heels. And she did. Didn't she not? Who wants to dispute that she didn't look like Wanderlei? She got up and she was like, walking up the stairs, jacked up on steroids, beyond belief, and looked like Wanderlei Silva in a dress and heels.
This wasn't the only time he publicly bullied the fighter. During an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, Dana joked that Chris probably has a male appendage. Yikes! Cyborg called out Dana for all this and years of bullying, and said that she wanted an apology. But instead, he released her from the UFC. So her hatred for the president is completely valid. Just like you'll have to agree with this next fighter on his reasons for hating Dana. I'm talking about Tito Ortiz, who's experienced a true friends to enemies arc with the guy. Yes, as hard as that might be to believe now, Ortiz and Dana used to be close friends. Dana was Tito's manager back in the day, and Tito helped build the Fertitta brothers as well. But it all came crashing down when Dana became the president of the UFC. Becoming the president of the promotion put a lot of distance in their friendship, as it became more professional and less personal. But they didn't hate each other just yet. No, the enmity started when Ortiz claimed that he deserved to be paid a lot more than he was getting from the UFC, especially for his fight with his old friend Chuck Liddell. Unfortunately, Dana White didn't agree with Ortiz on this, and this little financial disagreement drove a wedge between the two. Ortiz turned down the fight with Liddell, and Couture ended up taking up the fight. Tito lost a few fights before he got back on track after winning against Vitor Belfort. Sadly, that was the last fight of his contract, and he ended up walking away, still claiming that he never got what he deserved from the promotion. The fighter took every opportunity to talk trash about the UFC president from this point onwards, making it clear that he absolutely hated the guy. But that's still not where the story ends. In true UFC fashion, Tito was offered to fight Dana. Ortiz returned to the UFC a year after his contract ended. The promotion took him up, but not without some spice. His new contract stated that he could take the president of the UFC himself up in a boxing match. Now, this could have been the perfect opportunity for him to settle the score. This was the first time any fighter was offered anything like this, and there was a lot of hype built around this alleged fight. The UFC even released a documentary titled Bad Blood to get fans of the sport excited for the fight. But despite all their attempts to make the fight happen, Tito said that he wasn't interested in it. According to sources close to the fighter, his reason behind declining the offer to fight Dana was all in the past. White had gotten to his head a lot, and he wasn't going to let history repeat itself. But I think otherwise, because you see, although this time it seemed like the two were keeping their relationship highly professional, no one could have prepared us for how Tito's contract was going to end. He made history when he wore an iconic t-shirt that read, "Dana is my bitch," to his last fight with Lyoto Machida. He did end up losing that fight, but this moment will go down in history as one of the most iconic exits from the UFC. Can't blame the man though. A lot of fighters hate Dana because they weren't paid what they deserved. Take Couture for one. He became one of the biggest names in the world of MMA shortly after his debut. The fighter went on to become a heavyweight champion thrice and a light heavyweight champ twice. Safe to say, the man was on top of his game. But that doesn't mean he didn't have his fair share of problems in the UFC, especially with the president of the promotion. The fighter got into conflicts with the UFC not too long after his debut in the promotion, and he quit because of these very reasons. Now, you might be wondering, what did they disagree on? Just what could be so big that he was forced to leave the UFC? Well, after his departure, he came out and revealed to the public the real reason why he hated the UFC president. According to the fighter, he was never paid enough for the fights. Soon after Randy said this publicly, Dana was quick to come out and say that not only did he pay Randy what he deserved, he also had the receipts to prove the fighter was lying. But it's not like Randy Couture was coming back. He had joined Bellator MMA shortly after. This move further broke down the relationship between Randy and White. Couture has never stopped speaking up and fighting for the rights of fighters, and even made efforts to include MMA in the Muhammad Ali Expansion Act, which is a federal law to protect the rights of fighters in different combat sports. But apparently, fighters aren't the only ones that need protection from Dana. His wife needs some too. This reminds me of when Ramsey Nijem called him out for getting away with hitting his wife. We all know about the drama that went down, when Dana White publicly slapped his wife after having a little too much to drink at a party. You guys might not know that after the video went viral, Dana came out with a statement apologizing for what he did and explaining what happened. This was all fine, but the only issue that fighters and practically everyone else had was what he had to say about the punishment he was getting. In the statement he put out, White said that the punishment he's getting is the fact he'll have to live with this experience now, and wherever he goes, people will see him in a different light. The UFC president added that this was a much worse punishment than him being suspended from the UFC for a month or two. A lot of fighters called out White for this statement, and how he was dodging an actual punishment by saying all this. One fighter in particular was Ramsey Nijem, who made it pretty clear that he was not too fond of Dana's behavior or his apology. He took to Twitter to call White out and mention his own experience with getting suspended. Ramsey said that when he was suspended from the sport for 9 months for using marijuana, having to live with the reputation of a weed user would have been a better punishment for him. But not when it comes to physically abusing your partner. That calls for a suspension or even worse. He wasn't the only one who thought this. Alaquinta completely agreed with Ramsey on this as well. Al has had issues with the UFC for a long time, and he's made it pretty clear that him and UFC President Dana White aren't exactly the best of friends. He replied to Ramsey's tweet and said that when he was suspended for swearing at the crowd during his fights and wrecking a hotel room, a better punishment for him would have been to be known as a crowd-cursing hotel wrecker. This wasn't the only time he called White out for his behavior. Recently, Dana decided to move the weigh-ins back to their afternoon timing, the way it was done years ago. Most people didn't see an issue with this, but LaQuinta knew what was going on and didn't shy away from calling White out on it. He said that not only does Dana have no sense of reality, but it's also pretty clear that he doesn't care about his fighters' safety and well-being. The fighter added that the only reason Dana made this decision was to make the fights more exciting and increase the possibility of finishes in each fight. But the issue is that this time for weigh-ins doesn't give fighters enough time to recover from their weight cuts. But clearly, the UFC president doesn't care. So, from Al LaQuinta saying Dana is endangering fighters by doing weigh-ins in the afternoon, to Chris Cyborg hating Dana White for bullying her, this was the real reason so many fighters hate Dana White.